Well, 20 years into South Africa's young democracy, women still make only a tiny percentage of the workforce. According to a recent report released by Statistics South Africa, 39.5% of young women are out of work compared to just a third of men. This is Tonight. I'm Bruce Whitfield, and tonight we discuss the underrepresentation of women in the workplace. Is it by accident or is it by design? Joining me this evening, Nomboniso Gasa, who is independent researcher and analyst, and Joan de Klerk, who is Director of Public Education and Information at the Commission for Gender Equality. What are the issues here, Joan? Why is it that women are massively underrepresented in the workplace?
I wouldn't say that they were massively underrepresented in the workplace, because if you look at the Commission for Employment Equity report that was released in 2013, the workforce for men, 54% is male and 46% is female.
That is in the workforce, but if we look at people who are not employed, a higher proportion of women are not employed than men.
Yes, but I think you were asking why are they underrepresented in the workplace.
Okay,
so I don't think that's yes.
On specifics,
yes. So I don't think they're really underrepresented, that much underrepresented in the workplace, but I think they're underrepresented in specific positions in the workplace, for example, in executive management as well as in senior management. That's where I think the underrepresentation is, and they're underrepresented in boards. That's where women are underrepresented for us.
Let's get to women in the workplace in a moment, but let's look at women out of the workplace. We seem to have a real problem of women staying out of work before they even get a chance to compete for boardroom positions. Would you agree with that contention?
I think generally the youth of South Africa are out of the workplace. We know that there's a massive number of youth that are not in the workplace currently. So I wouldn't just say it's women alone, but it's generally youth that are underrepresented in the workplace at the moment. As much as they've been through universities and they've got the tertiary education, I think it's the availability of jobs that are causing the women to be out of the workplace, and not necessarily them being underrepresented.
Nobody says, is it that simple?
No, I mean, I agree with Joan to some extent, but I think that the recent report, actually by Statistics SA, tells a slightly different, gives a slightly different picture. One of the things that we know is that women make the majority of people that are outside of work. Young women are less likely to get jobs in this kind of economic climate than young men. So we have a general problem of youth unemployment, but we also have an exposure of young women as potentially being the ones that are likely to be left out of jobs.
Is the problem that the workplace remains sexist?
Well, yes, of course. I think that there are a couple of issues, actually. I think obviously the workplace cannot be separate from the kind of society that we have. Our society is deeply patriarchal. Our society is very sexist. It makes it very difficult for anybody who is considered to be an outsider in all sorts of ways to actually make a breakthrough. We also are not having innovative strategies to actually find a way of integrating a prior work experience into what would go and constitute what we would consider as work experience. So if I was at university and spent 4 years or 5 years at university, and I did a whole range of things at university, whether it was administering for the SRC and all those kinds of things, we haven't quite figured out how to integrate that as part of a learning work experience and ensuring that we encourage young people, we encourage them to go and have in the job work experience, even if they are not paid. And I think that would improve levels of attractiveness
if the jobs
of particular candidates.
If jobs aren't available, but that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, the jobs simply aren't available. We've got an economy that is on the verge of shrinking. We're not creating new opportunities. We can make this a sex issue, or we can make this an economic issue. Once we get the economic sorted out, does the sexism issue follow, or do we need to get the sexism issue sorted out first, Joan?
I think we first need to sort out the economic issue. I think in government there is an internship program that they've started, but we don't have a similar program in most of the public sector companies that exist. And yes, I agree with Nomboniso that we live in a patriarchal society, so obviously your boy child or your boy, the youth, the male youth would get a job before a female youth would get a job. And then secondly, once a woman has or is a single parent, it then becomes very difficult.
But the
for
burden
them
of
to,
childcare,
yes,
even in a dual household, tends to fall upon the woman. I mean, it's the
yes.
structure also. Maybe it's a policy discussion too that comes down to normally. So in terms of
it's a major policy discussion. It's a major policy and planning issue. I think that even though the economy is shrinking, what happens when an economy is shrinking and when an economy is distressed, all the problems become amplified. But what we are seeing is actually not necessarily different in terms of youth employment or youth unemployment. If you read the Stats SA report, from what has been the pattern since 1994. So what is happening is that the lens is more focused on what is happening to people that are outside of the job. So I think our underbelly is being exposed because we're all living in uncertain times. So I think that policy, government policy actually, we'll discuss the private sector just now. Government policy is not particularly innovative in terms of looking at how you can stretch the opportunities and how you can stretch the few rands that you have.
I mean, the European economic crisis has been significant. Youth unemployment rates in Spain, for example, are not dissimilar to what they are in South Africa. Masses of Spanish youth are unemployed in a struggling economy, just like South Africa. We talk about the public sector. The ANC, for example, has got a policy of equality. The ANC wants to have equal numbers of men and women in positions of authority. We then see the appointment of premiers following the most recent elections, and there are fewer women in positions of power now than there were before. Is the government sending the right message from the top?
Well, I don't think government's sending the right message from the top. If I take the example of more male premiers than female premiers, because if you want to live on by the 50-50 principle, then you should you should implement it in that way. It's no use putting it on paper. I think government is good at putting things on paper, but in implementation is a problem. I think it's a difficult position for anybody. Implementation always has its challenges. Everything is perfect when you put it on paper.
Nobody can throw stones in this particular argument either. The private sector can hardly put up its hand and say, look, we've got this right, the government has got this wrong. Yes. If you look at the top 40 companies on the JSE, the JSE Limited itself is chaired by Nonkululeko Nyembezi Haita, and Nikki Newton-King is the chief executive. Barclays Africa is chaired by Wendy Lucas-Bull and is the chief executive is Maria Ramos. Oh, and there's nobody else.
That's it.
And that is the extent of the private sector's success in this particular space as well. Speaking to various people in this particular sector and trying to grapple with these issues, some people say, well, the structure of the corporate sector is also wrong, Joan, in terms of women just don't want to fight men's stupid fights to get to the top of the corporate ladder. If what requires them to rise to the top of the corporate ladder requires them to behave like men, perhaps they're just not prepared to fight that particular fight.
I don't think they're not willing to fight the fight. I think it's the obstacles that are thrown at women who want to fight because of our patriarchal society. That makes it very difficult. So you've constantly got to fight.
You've got to fight dirtier and be harder.
And be harder. Yeah. And you've got to power dress to get to the top. I mean, it makes it very difficult. It's not the capabilities that women possess that are important. They make it extremely difficult for you to fight, because I think we have very good women out there that can do the job, that can be wonderful CEOs, that have the know-how. They just need to be given the chance to do it.
Do they need to be given the chance? Is that even that language, Nomboniso, is almost defeatist?
Well, I mean, to some extent, she's right, because when you are faced with obstacles and you are constantly having to break down the door, there is a certain level at which you feel that you have to have your break and you have to be given a chance. But I think that one of the critical issues that we have to accept is political will, is lack of political will. There's lack of political will. I mean, Spain is not particularly, a good example in terms of gender policies. Neither is UK, actually, right? So where you have...
Who's getting it right? Is anybody getting it right?
Well, the Norwegians are getting it quite right, actually. The Scandinavian countries are. Burundi is getting it right.
What?
Oh, yes.
Tell me.
Burundi is far ahead of South Africa, right, in terms of gender representation in parliament, in terms of political participation, in terms of the private sector participation, and so on. So one of the things that are very difficult to confront, I think, in the public policy space, South Africa has been sliding in the last 4 years, or in the last 5 years, where you have lack of political will and lack of commitment to implement the policies that you have on paper and to try new...
How do you expect men who are entrenched in privilege and opportunity to share? Because that's essentially what you're saying a male-dominated society must do. What is the incentive to change behavior?
Well, you can use a carrot and a stick, right? If you have policies, I mean, for example, again, I want to look at this thing that I'm calling political will, the problem of political will. A lot of South African companies budget from early on for the penalties that they will have in terms of not including women and in terms of not meeting the quotas in terms of racial representation and so on. So they budget for that. So that's kind of like known that they'll budget for that. So in a way, you also need your policymakers to say, you know what, if you continue to do this, we're going to make it difficult for you because we're trying to construct a society. But you also need to give incentives. And some of the incentives are that, you know, if you behave if as a mining company, right, you behave in a particular way, you get the communities, the women in the particular community where you are based, to be the shareholders instead of having your usual BE, big names to be the shareholders. That would be the incentive.
We need to wrap it up. I mean, Joan, is there an incentive? Is there an economic incentive, proven economic incentive, that you can take to male-dominated boards, male-dominated government departments and say, guys, here is the rationale to change?
I don't think there's an economic incentive at the moment for women to be fast-tracked or to be facilitated into particular positions. I wouldn't want to say that if you give a woman economic incentive to be fast-tracked into a particular position, are you saying that women are not capable of doing the job? And that's the question that you need to ask. And where I stand at the Commission, we feel that women are just as good as men in the positions that they hold, and they should be in those positions to do the job.
There we go. And at that point, we must leave it. Nomboniso Gasa, the independent researcher and analyst. Joan de Klerk, Director of Public Education and Information with the Commission for Gender Equality. An interesting discussion and a tough debate which is being held worldwide. We don't really need to care about what the rest of the world is doing. We need to look maybe more closely at what Burundi is doing and apply some of those lessons here. There'll be more tonight, tomorrow. Till then, bye-bye.